Welcome to the Newbuild podcast. Today we're going to be talking about this development here. This is a Wembley Park development, and what makes it so exciting is it's the first project, which is a new build residential one, to pass through Gateway 3 of the Building Safety Regulator. I'm going to talk about this process with the principal designer and the principal contractor for the schemes. Let's find out what the tips are which you can learn for your development and application. I'm Nick Haughton. I'm glad to be hosting this session, this really insightful session we're about to have on the Gateway process, particularly focused on Gateway 3. I've got with me Gemma from Sisk and Chris from Tompkins Architects, and we're going to dive into the situation with the NEO2 scheme and how it became the first project to pass through Gateway 3 from a new build point of view. Chris, start by introducing yourself.
My name is Chris Fellner. I'm a director here at Haworth Tompkins, and I lead on many of our residential and master planning schemes, and was involved on the Wembley project from, really frankly, winning the competition back in 2018 or 2019, and then all the way through to completion.
Gemma, introduce yourself.
Gemma Wainwright, the design manager on NEO2 for Sisk.
So welcome to both of you, and I'd like to first start by setting the scene for the audience to understand a little bit more about Gateway 3. What was the trigger for passing through Gateway 3, and tell us a little bit about the timings you found, Gemma.
So just to set the scene, NEO2 was being delivered alongside NEO3, which was also being delivered by Sisk and Quintain and Haworth Tompkins. NEO2 and NEO3, it was a similar design, almost identical, to be honest. The only difference was that we had a different building inspector, approved inspector. And so AIS on NEO2 went bust and they entered liquidation, and then we had to go into the Building Safety Act and then subsequently issue a Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 submission.
That's interesting. So as passing through the Gateway process, I'm guessing you were the principal contractor and Tompkins were the principal designer. But so tell us a little bit about what that actually meant in practical terms, Gemma, about moving into the Gateway process, the thinking which was different being the pre-Gateway process, and how what that actually meant, and to actually achieve a successful Gateway 3.
So NEO2 was one of the first projects that had to go through the transitional kind of gateway process. Obviously, a lot of projects would start by going through the gateway process from this point, but we had to obviously submit a Gateway 2 application way after we'd started building on site. So we were actually nearing one of the first practical completions when we fell into the Building Safety Act. So we had to compile kind of all of the information to give to the regulator, which we had already given to our improved inspector and had, brought along on the journey with us. They knew everything that we had done, every decision we had made. And then we had to kind of explain all of that again to the Building Safety Regulator.
The process of gathering the information up after the point of which Gateway 2 would typically be done now, as you say. Mm-hmm. That's obviously testament to the way Sisk had already started that process. Tell us a little bit about, if we wind the clock back before the Gateway process and so on, what was the initial approach? How did you bring together teams at an early stage in the supply chain?
Yeah, I think on NEO2 we already had an amazing team on the project. Haworth Tompkins had done an incredible stage 4 design, and in stage 5 we had a lot of information. So actually compiling the documents was one of the easier parts, apart from the fact that there were thousands of them. There was a huge amount of information for us to bring together and send to them. And that includes not only the Haworth Tompkins information, but also, like you say, all of the supply chain information, the balconies, the windows, the bathroom pods, all the things like this that we did at a very early stage. We had all of that ready to go.
How would you define the success here? I'd be interested in both your viewpoint on this. Perhaps, Chris, if you kick us off on it. But what would you define as being the successful, the things which were key to making a successful Gateway 3 application?
I think what sets our Wembley project apart from anything that we've done in that shape or form otherwise, and which then led to a successful Gateway 3 application, was the early engagement with the supply chain, from Techcrete to Sapphire to Reynards, the bathroom pods, and a really close relationship with Sisk and Quintain. So we find sometimes, as architects, there's a lot of misconceptions, that we, are only interested in the design. We're not that interested in building. And I think we always seen ourselves as a design and build architect. And I was always wondering, at what point are we going to fall out or have difficult times with Sisk? But that never really happened. I think there was good trust alongside each other. We worked really collaboratively. Too often you see the designers and the builders on two sides of the spectrum fighting with each other, but we realized that if we were to kind of get through this successfully, we had to work together, and we hugely benefited from Sisk's really collaborative approach and helping us. And I think the fact that we were always an entire work stage ahead of where we would traditionally be. So I'm still convinced you could have built of our planning drawings, or at least 10 of them really well, and that kind of paid off. So all the evidence gathering, the recording, that is painful and time intensive, but I think Sisk and Quintain realized that was necessary to do. So when we then had to go through the process, while it was an incredible amount of work for the site team and Gemma to compile it all, it wasn't like we had to scramble for it because we hadn't thought about it. I mean, it was all out there and coordinated. I think that we benefited from actually going to the supply chain and working with real companies, helping us to define things early on, and that paid off in the end.
And from the Sisk point of view, what would you define as being the key success?
Yes, I think, like Chris said, that early design piece is fundamental to the gateway approval. I think we were lucky that we'd already engaged with all of the supply chain at that point. We had all of the information very early, and it was almost like we'd done exactly what the BSR wanted to start doing. We'd already done that with NEO2. So I think we were just, fortunately, a little bit ahead of quite a lot of other buildings that were being built at the time.
You've been working on the Wembley Park development for Quintain for several years, and we'd worked with you on previous blocks ahead of this. We'd had the Building Safety Act come out in 2022, but the work on this scheme was predating that. So why did Sisk bring together their supply chain collaborative? It's obviously the behaviour which is now, for want of a better phrase, mandated in the Building Safety Act to actually bring together teams at an early stage. But why did Sisk do it when it wasn't, the Building Safety Act wasn't out at that stage?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is obviously the relationship that Sisk has with Quintain around that development. We've worked on a lot together, and each project moves forward in some way, and one of the things that we are really keen to do is always progress, always make a change, always do something better on the next job. And I think that, NEO2 and NEO3, we'd got to that point where we were starting to think, how do we improve things at the beginning? Which, I think that's probably the main.
So I remember the conversations from Sapphire Balcony's point of view, the conversations you brought together and started at an early stage with Techcrete, the panelised precast panels manufacturer. But there was a desire to obviously address the interfaces, which, funny enough, the BSR fed back to us recently is that the biggest issue they tend to find is people not considering the interface and not being there. But that was obviously a key part of your driver, and I know it brought down the cost, it brought down the carbon by 22%. But what did it do for buildability and the sequencing and so on? What's your thoughts on that, Chris?
I mean, it's been hugely beneficial for us having the both players, Techcrete on the facades and Sapphire, then on the balconies, almost like confirmed, and having a working and design relationship with both parties early on to exactly address those interfaces. I mean, so often when that is not in place, we, apply our best intentions and experience and try to detail it as robust as possible. But inevitably, it will not, or it's not guaranteed that whoever then wins the job actually wants to build it that way. And there's a lot of abortive work for us. There's a lot of like uncertainty about those interfaces and detailed junctions that are then, more complicated than they need to be. And I think in this way, it's gone even further back, because knowing that we would build this with Techcrete, we set out the entire superstructure, to suit that particular system. So the whole column grid, everything is set out to work with Techcrete's product, which then meant the deflection heads or the deflection within the slabs was slimmer. We could optimize the entire superstructure and achieve those carbon savings that we come towards. So I think Sisk's and Quintain's approach of designing a kit of parts was really helpful. And I think, again, on the balcony design, for example, we would have probably designed a different balcony than Sapphire can produce. But when we knew you on board, and these are your limitations and these are your constraints, and you say had to have solid sides, then we didn't even bother with seeing if we could have open sides. It was just quite clear, this is the system, and you then design within the constraints, limitations, or advantages of that particular system. And that has been really beneficial for us, because we had a lot less abortive work, and we just knew, these are the rules and constraints you've got to work within. And I think really quite exciting. And the result that we ended up with of that interface that is so slick now in the way it was built and put together, and the advantages it had on the buildability, air tightness, fireproofing, was so much simpler than on any project I worked before.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to raise, actually. The connection between the balcony and the facade has always been an issue if it comes to waterproofing, acoustics, fire. All of those things are really hard to kind of coordinate and get right. And I think the hook-on balcony system was just one of those things that it just worked, and it solved all of those problems. And the fact that Techcrete and Sapphire could work so well together to get that to work, I think was
fan and the ventilation would go through the roof, because that's usually where your air intake and extract, the strong point of your panel, and the balcony connections, they all want to go through that slab edge, and that's where you got to waterproof and fireproof. And the fact that we designed all that out collectively as a team, and everybody played their part in it, I think was, the beauty of the project, and made our life a lot easier.
I think the speed also, the speed at which we can put the balconies on. I think at one point we were doing about 30 balconies a day or something, which is an incredible amount of balconies to get on in a day. So, yeah.
Going back to the kind of that sequencing piece and the interfaces, obviously the understanding that aspiration originally of wanting to build faster and to work in a way which suited that process meant that we could tackle the challenges collaboratively across suppliers and principal contractors and principal designers. And by doing so, you've ended up with the real benefits of MMC. But that, no doubt, that design and build, that design process from splitting it out and not being design and build as you go along, but being designed and then built, obviously has helped you in the gateway process as well. So just for the audience, people watching may not have necessarily gone in for a Gateway 2 application, wanted to perhaps distill it down to a really simple takeaway, the difference between Gateway 2 and Gateway 3. Gemma, do you want to give us a little bit of an overview of kind of what information is at Gateway 2 and how does that differ from what's at Gateway 3?
Yeah, so I guess Gateway 2, usually, not with our scenario, but usually you would do this before you start building. So that is, it's there with all the information, what you're planning to build, sent to the regulator, this is what we're going to do, and get that signed off. Whereas Gateway 3 is, we've built it now, and this is all the as-built information, these are all the certificates, these are all, this is a completed building, and now we need you to approve this. So that's kind of how I would explain the difference.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that process at Gateway 3 is not as built in the old Regulation 38, where an as-built might just be a handful of drawings which are where what was intended. It's truly what was built and the kind of changes and everything adopted throughout the process, isn't it? Any thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think like Gemma said, Gateway 2 is the intent and proving the compliance, and Gateway 3 is then the evidencing. So, and I think what we now see with that process in place, what you really want to try to minimize, if not totally avoid, are changes. Yeah. So ideally, your Gateway 3 information isn't that different from your Gateway 2.
Yeah, definitely.
And I suppose on Wembley, the fact that we had a very experienced client, we had a main contractor with a really good relationship with that client, and the continuity of the design team and the early engagement meant we were on budget. There was no real need for a lot of changes. I think compared to other schemes, there's always going to be some change, in that construction process, but it was a lot less than usual, and that change was really well managed. I think there were very robust change control procedures from Quintain and Sisk in place.
Yeah.
To, those differences then from Gateway 2 to Gateway 3, we were able to, evidence what had happened. But in the first instance, it is really try to avoid changes as much as you can, and I think we had the right setup for that.
Yeah, I think we were fortunate as well. As we were a transitional project, we didn't have to submit everything around change to the Building Safety Regulator. So that was probably another reason why it wasn't fast by any means, but that was why we were able to sort of shortcut that.
So that's really interesting. So we talk about is by putting the work in up front and bringing people together, it actually ended up with less changes, not just a process which you can control the changes which are made. And I guess in really simple terms, if you're designing a building as you go, the reality is it is going to have more changes, and if it's actually been done, as you say, moving the structure and everything to work well together, will undoubtedly result in it. So it's actually turning theory of MMC back into actual reality and sites. Talk me through the scrutiny you had at Gateway 3 in particular. I know it's a topic which a number of people are worried about at Gateway 3. There's not much experience in the industry at Gateway 3 yet. Yeah. Gemma, what sort of scrutiny or what questions were you getting from the BSR?
We had a lot of questions. We also had an inspection. We had 2 inspections, in fact. So we had our building control that we had. So we got Brent building control as soon as AIS went into liquidation. That just happened. That's who we got. So they came on board, and we had a lot of site walks with them, making sure that everything was in place. Then we also had site walks with the Building Safety Regulator and the LFB. And they were probably the trickiest things, because we wanted to make sure that we had everything ready for them and everything running correctly, so that when they were coming around and they were asking us to do different things with the systems, we could do that. In terms of questions about the information that we submitted, there wasn't a huge amount of queries that came from the Gateway 3 application. Most of it was in the Gateway 2, which by the time we got to Gateway 3, we had cleared up. Obviously there were a few things, but there was a lot less in terms of queries. Yeah.
What were the queries you were getting in the scrutiny at Gateway 2?
There was a lot of structural queries. There were a lot of just kind of basic questions about information, but a lot of it was just that we needed to submit either a little bit more information, or our structural engineer had to kind of just explain how the decision was made. Yeah. But the HT document that we had, the compliance document, which stated how each and every building regulation had been met, was the kind of signposting that the BSR needed. And that closed out a lot of the questions before they even got to us, if that makes sense.
So tell us about that, Chris.
There were some really interesting things that actually came up. I also remember things that we weren't expecting, for example. So on the fire safety and there were a couple of doors that weren't picked up in the CFD modeling which way round they had to be hung. And it was only at Gateway 3 when the systems were tested. I think that's the interesting bit. Does the building actually perform then when you switch all the systems on? Do they perform as per design intent? And it then appeared that that's a good lessons learned for us. There were within the fire lobbies a couple of doors that we had to hang the other way around, and that hadn't been picked up at Gateway 2. And then there were a few fire alarms that expected that we had to work around. So that was the level of detail. I also, anecdotally, I know that during Gateway 3, the regulator comes up and asks for further evidence, I think they give you 48 hours to respond. And that doesn't take into account holidays. So I think we were, in some instances, quite lucky that when those questions came, key people who had that knowledge were able to respond. If they had asked a week later, and our project architect would have been on holiday somewhere, I think we would have struggled. So I don't know if that 48-hour thing that is quite ideal. And otherwise, like Gemma said, I think we had quite robust trackers and checklists for all the different compliance of each element. And I think it basically, the gateway process forces you to really stick to good practice. And I think if you are the kind of designer and contractor and client who is aiming for best practice anyway, I feel like as long as you trust your systems and you work properly, you should be fine. I think it's more the ones who cut corners and have a little bit less experience, they are the ones who are being found out.
And from a product information from your supply chain and so on, how did you find that process of getting what you needed for the gateway application?
It was good actually for the most part, especially with Gateway 3 and the as-builts and the O&Ms. We had all of the information, from everybody. There was very little that came back from the BSR for the supply chain to look at, to be honest.
Yeah. And why was that the case? Was it the people you're using? Was it the control measures? What to talk us?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. Obviously, for the O&Ms, you need a good set of information, and we have someone very good that helps us compile all of that. So I think, we just have to make sure that we have all of that ready to go.
We found sometimes that a certain system has been tested in a particular condition, and if you want to use the same product but the condition is slightly different, you might find you don't have the exact test results. So there's that bit of ambiguity. Can I still use this product in a slightly different way? So I think these are, but you're getting really detailed now where, good trust and discussions between the designers and the approvers to make that judgment call, and then, being able to record that and evidence that it's obviously safe is, and I wouldn't be surprised if on the supplier side and the manufacturer side, really having up-to-date test results in multiple applications and conditions is going to be required in order to, make sure that we can evidence that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a manufacturer, obviously we've got a fire-stopping product, which is one of the key scrutinised areas, and rightly so. But from our point of view, I think there's two parts to it. One is the competence, which is obviously mandatory under the Building Safety Act, and demonstration of that, both operationally and the individuals involved in design, obviously. But the second piece is the test data, and as you say, making sure that we're working out into what are the next scenarios and doing them before you need them, because realistically, tests take a long time to book into a test house and to get done.
Particularly if you want to innovate, and use something in a different way. If then we find like, oh, it hasn't been tested in that condition or as a whole assembly, sometimes that's also the fact that you don't just have to prove that a product performs in isolation. It's as the entire assembly, where you then have different manufacturers almost having to do a test collectively.
Yeah, that's interesting. So on that point, on particularly in relation to competence and making sure that you've got competent people in the process, how do you make sure from both of your sides, perhaps if we start with you, Gemma, how do you make sure that the people which are being appointed to the project are competent?
we at Sisk, we have a supply chain that we trust and that we've used for many years. And that's not to say that we're not going to use different companies, but I think there's a lot of trust with the ones that we do use. There's a lot of experience. There's a lot of knowledge from past projects. And yeah, I think everyone's had to step up and prove that competence, actually, especially with documentation. And it's not, with the supply chain, it's not, the documentation is not always readily available. And I think people have definitely made a massive effort to make sure that they have that now.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously an SME, we've got about 100 staff, but we do invest a lot into our staff. We do a lot of training, particularly now around the Building Safety Act and being building safety principal designers. So we've managed to get our people on those courses, getting registered. We do a lot of lessons learned in-house. And I suppose what we had to do is we had to put quite a senior team on with people with a lot of construction experience who are not doing it for the first time. So they knew, even though the process was new, we trusted them to, being able to detail and understand the sequencing and how buildings are put together. We've got our own in-house, technical Q&A process, but ultimately what really helped us was the fact that the project never really went on hold. We had that continuity, and we don't structure our teams as in like a certain team does the design up to planning and then a different team builds it. At Haworth Tompkins, people stay all the way through if the project continues, which meant that when we came to the tender and to the construction phases, our architects would have been on the project for years. I mean, poor them having to work on Wembley for 5 years of their career, but they were there from the beginning to the end. They knew about all the changes. They knew, why certain decisions had been made. There was a lot of, don't underestimate the personal relationship between, Gemma on one side and our architects on the other, and I think you build up that trust. You have the embodied knowledge, and no matter how good your filing systems are, if you hand it over from one person to the other, there's always the risk that you lose a little bit. And for us, it was the continuity.
Yeah, that's interesting. So making sure that our process is controlled and everyone as part of the supply chain, if you've not been involved in a Gateway 2 or 3 application, everyone should be thinking about this and thinking about how their document control, how their version control is. I know certainly we've been developing our system over years, and you've probably come across the passport system we use, but also making that, taking that to the next level, subject for another day, but something which we've been doing a lot more with AI and making sure we can track the changes and identify risk areas and on that sort of thing. Yeah. So I would like to move the conversation on a little bit to talk about some of the general lessons which we can give us a few takeaways for the industry, if you like. There's a concern in the industry about Gateway 3 potentially becoming the old Gateway 2, the big delays and so on. Tell us from your point of view, Gemma, in terms of timescales and so on, how was your Gateway 2? Appreciate was quite different to what a Gateway 2 application would be now, given the circumstance of what happened. But tell us about the timings of your Gateway 2 and 3 applications.
Yeah.
How will it take?
Okay, so AIS went into liquidation on the 7th of May 2024. We submitted our Gateway 2 application 2 weeks after that, so we spent 2 weeks compiling the information that we needed. Our Gateway 3 was split into 3 submissions. So NEO2 had 10 sectional completions, and we were informed that for each section we would need a separate Gateway 3 submission. So what we did is we sort of pushed the practical completions together. So we had just 3 different submissions. And we submitted these. I think the first one was the end of November, the second one, the end of December. And then the third one was in the following May. And both Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 all got approved on the same date, which was the 6th of August, 2025. So I think from Gateway 2 to approval was about 65 weeks in total. And for Gateway 3, the final Gateway 3 was 12 weeks. That was only 4 weeks later than it should have been. The other two obviously were much longer. And in reality, I don't think that they would have looked at the first two Gateway 3 submissions. I think they only looked at all of it together kind of at the end in that 12-week period.
What would be your one recommendation for somebody who's looking at that kind of process and so on? What would you suggest from a timings point of view?
I think the number one thing is how long it takes to compile. Depending on how big your building is, obviously ours was fairly big, 487 units. So that's quite a lot of information to pull together, over 2,000 documents. And each one you have to upload to the portal individually. And, you know, there's very specific naming things you can't use, kind of underscores and things like that. So if you're downloading from like Viewpoint or Aconex or Dalux or something similar to that, you'll need to amend every file name before you can upload it to the system. So that obviously takes a long time. I would say time more than anything, factor that in. And then just having a clear document register with everything that you've issued on it, the revisions, the dates, as clear as possible so that you can just go back and refer to, you know, you get questions from them asking when you submitted things and you can just go back and check it easily.
Interesting. Chris, any thoughts?
I think it's a bit like doing a tax return, right? If you, on the 30th of January, you start looking for all your receipts, it's going to be painful. But if you basically keep your house in order as you go along, you've got clear systems. I think sounds like there's certain things that need to be ironed out about, you know, different systems or naming conventions, making that a little bit easier and streamlined in the future. But it's you know, working professionally with the team collectively along, making sure you spread that workload out and basically keep your systems tidy, and then it should be. There's still a lot of work involved in it, but you know, it's more like making that more manageable and less surprises, really.
And I think the BSR are working on kind of the uploading system. I know when we submitted our final Gateway 3 application, I could upload folders, but I believe that's been taken away again. So clearly there's things that are ongoing that are being worked on, which is good to see, but it's probably just not quite there yet, unfortunately.
So it's only starting with the end in mind, working from there rather than, as you say, I like your analogy, the tax return. And it is something which kind of, you know, we might have been used to working very last minute, generally as construction, but starting with that end in mind and actually making sure you got the information is a key requirement on the Building Safety Act now. The next question I've got is, what advice would you give to a contractor or a developer who hasn't yet been through the Gateway 2 and 3, in addition to what you've just mentioned there?
Yeah, I think obviously what I just touched on, just good coordination with the team, with the consultants, with the supply chain. That's got to be your number one takeaway, I'd say.
What sort of time, what reader stage would you bring in your supply chain?
Well, it should definitely be probably between planning and stage 4. Yeah. So as soon as you've put your Gateway 1.
Yeah, that's what we see as well. I mean, the big change is you're going to do your tender packs, your stage 4. You need to have
that needs to be done already.
Your supply chain and your manufacturers lined up.
What one thing would you suggest the BSR should take as a takeaway?
Putting on a spot here, I think there's this interesting concept of the approval with requirements. I think it's more like we're happy that the system is in place now. I think it was time, and the outcomes will result hopefully in better quality. I think smaller contractors or smaller projects, you know, at tender stage already, you know, having it all down to the very last component is very difficult. So that approval with requirements, I think, can be, you know, a successful situation. I think we also need to understand that these regulators need to be well funded. They need to have the manpower to deal with all the applications that are coming through. And I suppose it's, in a best case scenario, it will result in a system whereby players that maybe traditionally would have been, quite far removed and with a lot of mistrust, between each other, that people understand that they have to work as a team with trusting each other and working collectively. So if that's the outcome of the gateway process, then that's got to be a good thing.
One recommendation, Gemma, for the BSR.
I think they just need to really give clear guidance on what should be submitted for both Gateway 2 and Gateway 3, so that contractors have the best chance of submitting the correct information.
Just a few rapid fire questions. One word to describe Gateway 3, Gemma.
Approved.
Approved, yeah. Thanks, Chris. I'll take that. Challenging.
Biggest challenge.
Uploading all the documents.
Biggest surprise.
Getting approval.
One thing you'd do differently.
Have more time.
One thing the industry needs to change quickly.
They need to speed up.
One word, Chris, to describe Gateway 3.
Approved.
The biggest challenge.
I suppose that's with Gemma, the upload of the documents, it's been painful.
Biggest surprise.
That we got it all done in the end.
One thing you'd do differently.
Nothing really. I think we'll do it again that way.
And one thing the industry needs to change quickly.
Pass on that one. I think I'll have to trust my collaborators. I'm out of my depth there.
But I'd like to thank you for both contributing today. It's been really insightful, and I'm sure many of the people which might be boring about Gateway 3, hopefully will get a bit of insight. And what I'm quite pleasantly surprised by is seeing a project which was not initially going to go through the Gateway process because it's pre-Building Safety Act, then did, where you had the information to make it go through smoothly, which is a great testament to the way that the project was working, the way you're bringing people together. And my key takeaway is certainly the way that by having that initial information up front has meant that you've had less change control as you've gone through. But what would your key takeaway be, Gemma?
I think overall, just very proud of what we've achieved on NEO2, of the information that was there, of the way it was built, just proving to the BSR how brilliant this building is, was actually, I take away a lot of pride from that.
Yeah, I think when Quintain decided to take that approach and actually, put their money where their mouth is, because they had to pay, the design team and Sisk during the PCSA period to do all that work up front. I think that has been proven to be, a good investment because they had the cost certainty. There was hardly any VE post-planning, and we managed to, produce a high-quality product at a, competitively good price point. So it's that investment in design that, as architects, we want to see happening, and not that, kicking the can down the road and see where you can cut corners.
Some great points here, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today as we've gone through and unravelled the different parts and challenges and positives which have come through from the learnings from the North East Stands site at Wembley Park. Again, I'd like to thank our two guests for joining us here today, and thank you and goodbye from Newbuild.